Life can be fun. Go to the forest where the shadows do run. They're coming soon. They can hear you. Story time. Come inside. Donna Carey tells the story.
Hey y'all, I'm Donna.
And I'm Carrie.
And we are Paranormal Chicks.
And y'all, guess what? We're still in 31 Nights of Halloween. And we have a special guest with us this week, this episode, this time. Anyway, his name is Brandon Schexnayder, and he is from the amazing podcast, Southern Gothic.
Y'all know, you've heard about him. I have a huge crush on him. He is the daddy of all daddies.
And he's like, yep, not going on my feed. Brandon is here, and he is going to share us a story that we don't even know anything about it yet. So sit back, get comfortable, and prepare to be spooked.
Hey, y'all. Thank you for having me on. I appreciate it. I miss you guys. It's been, a month and a half? And I was just in Hattiesburg, and I missed you.
You didn't stop by. That's the problem.
You didn't call. You didn't write. You just drove on through.
I sent you a message. I just didn't tell you
okay.
when.
Yeah, you did right. Technically, you did right.
Yeah. I swear to God, you know where I went when I stopped in Hattiesburg, aside from the gas station? I went to Krispy Kreme in
Did
Hattiesburg.
you really?
Yeah.
Was it hot and ready, though?
It wasn't. It was in the afternoons. So I was driving down to get Brianna and my parents after the hurricane, and I was going to bring them back up here, right? So I stopped in Hattiesburg to get gas, and I texted my dad. I was like, is there anything you need? This is like the last sign of electricity for the next hour,
Yeah.
And he's like, your sister wants donuts. And like, I swear to God, it was like serendipitous. I just got off at the right exit, and there was Krispy Kreme right there. So
that's hilarious.
Yep. So I missed you guys, but I totally got like a nice iced lemonade and a 12-pack of assorted Krispy Kremes from Hattiesburg. But anyway, my story tonight, since I just broke into talking about the hurricane, I'm going to tell you guys a story that it's a little personal about that. And the hurricane and everything really it makes me want to tell this story some more. So I'm going to tell you about a supposed voodoo curse this evening. So I'm just going to start out. Have you guys do you spend a lot of time ever going in the direction of New Orleans? Y'all ever hang out down there in Southeast Louisiana? I know y'all are close.
Yeah, absolutely. We go to New Orleans all the time.
Yeah, Carrie goes a lot more than me.
Have you ever heard of this restaurant called Middendorf's? It is. Okay, so this was like, it is. It's like the best seafood restaurant. Everybody takes trips out from New Orleans. It's a place called Middendorf's. It's on I-55, and it's on this little isthmus between Lake Pontchartrain and Lake Maurepas. And it's this swamp area. It's called Manchac Swamp. All right. And this restaurant, I mean, we used to go there. It was like for graduations and stuff. This was like the cool, nice, restaurant, the seafood restaurant. But so that's what most New Orleanians and folks know it. And you head out to that swamp, you go west of New Orleans, and right after you get out of the city, you end up on these long bridges, these long concrete bridges that are just taking you over swampland, and you just see nothing but just swampland. And all this stuff used to be cypress swamps, right? All these things used to be, it was just covered cypress swamps and pelicans as far as your eye could see, and just this thick swamp coming out of New Orleans. And now it's been thinned out a lot. And this story kind of talks about that a little bit, but right there where Middendorf's is it used to be a town right there called Frenier. And Frenier's not there anymore. It's totally gone. And Frenier was first founded somewhere in the 1830s. It was a community of German immigrants, which is close to my heart because Schexnayder is a name from the German coast, which is we were all the Germans that the French people convinced to come over and farm for them in New Orleans. We were the poor farmers in Germany, and the French people couldn't farm themselves in New Orleans, and we saved their asses. So so this little community called Frenier was out there for not quite 100 years. It it started it started building up out there. They were chopping down, they were doing logging communities of these cypress trees and chopping down all these cypress trees, and made a good bit of money out there doing cypress. And then eventually they started farming cabbage, and it was a small community that you could only get to by railroad, even at the turn of the 20th century. So I'm going to tell you about probably their most infamous resident. Out in Frenier is, like I said, it's mostly German immigrants. You can really there's no electricity out there. You can only get there by railroad. Only way in and out is railroad or Piro, right? You can get out there by a boat. This is totally Cajun country. I feel did not bring that up at all. But out there, it's a small community. A few hundred folks were out there. And one of their residents was a woman by the name of Julia Brown. And Julia Brown was, a lot of people say that she was a voodoo priestess. And Julia lived out there. From what we can tell, she moved out there somewhere around 1890. She's on the 1890 census record and lived out in Frenier. And she lived with her husband, Celestin Brown. And they had about 40 acres of land and were likely farm cabbage, something like that out there. But Julia she's well known in the community and very much filled this kind of stereotypical role for a Black woman during that time of, she was considered on the edge of town and they called her Aunt Julia. And supposedly she used her knowledge of voodoo to help with some of the healing, some of the childbirths, and just kind of all those things, because New Orleans was, an hour train ride away. You'd have to wait a week to get help if you needed some type of medical assistance. And Aunt Julia filled that need for this small town of Frenier. Julia did that for a long time, and she became a beloved member of the community. And then one day something happened. We don't know what it is, but the legend says that at some point her relationship with this small little community, it started to sour. It might have been, it looked like Celestin, her husband, died somewhere between 1900 and 1910. It looked like he passed away. There's a good chance, looking at research, that we think she actually had what looked like she had some children on the census records, but then they disappeared and we haven't been able to find them. So she may have had children and lost her children. I don't know. Something happened. And Aunt Julia started having a bad relationship with the people of Frenier. So legend says that what she did was she basically started spending her days on the edge of town after Celestin died, just on her front porch, in a rocking chair, fiddling around with yarn, tying knots in yarn, and singing this song. And the song was ominous, of course. And she was probably singing it in French. French was her first language, because at that point she was about 80 years old, and this was 1910 to 1915. So she was likely born into slavery in Louisiana, likely to a Creole family. So she was singing in French, would have been singing, "When I die, I'm going to take the whole town with me. When I die, I'll take the whole town with me." And this little old lady sat on her porch. "When I die, I'll take the whole town with me." Obviously, people were freaked out, right?
Right.
You are in this little swamp community. I mean, God, who wouldn't, right? Little swamp community. It's primarily a German immigrant white community. And you have this woman who's been taking care of your kids and been a part of the community. This Black woman that you don't even understand what her religion is or anything is telling you that she's going to take out the town when
Right.
That's pretty scary.
Absolutely.
Well, then on September 28th, 1915, Julia Brown died. And as far as we can tell, she died of natural causes. She's approximately 70 years old at the time, and she died. And now this community had to decide, what the hell? Like, what's going to happen to us, right?
Right.
So 2 days later, Aunt Julia had her funeral. The whole town showed up, whether that was out of fear and they wanted to appease her soul, whether or not she just was such a beloved member of this community that they all wanted to be there. She had her funeral and they all showed up. But at her funeral, that day of her funeral was particularly eerie outside. It was one of those days where everything was just dark and calm, and it felt like something bad was about to happen. So, of course, there was only standing room at her funeral. So in the middle of her funeral, all of a sudden you hear the rain start hitting the roof. You start hearing the wind pick up. And this wasn't any wind. It turns out that in the middle of her funeral, the great hurricane of 1915 was passing through Frenier. It was literally hitting a Category 4 storm. At that point in time, this was the largest recorded hurricane to have plowed through New Orleans and up the river. And it was hitting on the exact time that Aunt Julia Brown's funeral was happening. So obviously, people are freaked out. This is a big deal. This hurricane's hitting. Everything's going crazy. The storm surge is starting to whip up. And anybody that's ever been in a hurricane, the winds from a hurricane are scary as shit. So hopefully I'm not triggering anybody's PTSD here from down in New Orleans, because trust me, I grew up going through these hurricanes, and some of these are just freaking scary. So you can imagine 1915, you can't get out. The only way in and out of town is by boat or by a railroad. And this wind is hitting. Some of these people might have known. They might have known it was coming. But, knowing the weather back then, you didn't know it like you did now. Plus, they were in this isolated community. So there's no telling what they knew was going on. But of course, this hurricane was just enormous. The storm surge is coming up. People are running to get help, to get protection. There are people climbing trees to get away from the rising waters. There's people that are going and trying to get in the railroad, and the railroad tries to take off to New Orleans with folks in it, and it barely gets away. Frenier, by the end of this, was completely destroyed. Almost everyone in that community was killed in this hurricane that started during Aunt Julia's funeral. And this is all recorded fact. This hurricane happened during Aunt Julia's funeral. This is in newspaper reports from 2 days later. This hurricane actually happened exactly at the time of Aunt Julia's funeral. So, of course, the legend was born. Did she cause this? Was this actually Aunt Julia's doing? Did she destroy the town of Frenier or not? That's the question that we've been grappling with since then. So, I don't know. What do you guys think? Does that sound like something that's real or not? I mean,
I don't know, because you think about at the time, they didn't have the Weather Channel being like, the storm's coming and it's going to follow this path, much less the ability to predict where it's going to, like where the landfall is going to be and all of that. But on the flip side, the timing is just such a coincidence.
Yeah. I don't think she was an evil person. So I don't think she would have that much like anger. But like you said, you don't know what happened and made her snap, if that's what happened. I mean,
exactly.
I'm a believer. I am a believer. So I'm like, she did it. Beyond the grave, she did it. Some people keep their promises. Yeah, that's speaking from trauma over here.
I was going to say, bitter party of one.
Always a party of one, never a party of two.
Well, there's a lot. I think there's a lot more to this story even, but that's the classic telling that a lot of people say. Frenier has never really come back. Right now, there's a little swamp tour there. And if you go take the swamp tour, then you can see it's a prop. It's not real, but they have a little cemetery there in the swamp tour, which would represent what the community of Frenier is. My understanding, I haven't looked at it personally, and I should have plugged this, but this is where it's going. My sister Brienne is my researcher, is my partner on Southern Gothic, even though she's the introvert that doesn't want her voice ever heard. And she's done a massive amount of research on Julia Brown, and that Cajun Pride swamp tour you can go on is you actually will pass over a part of the land that Julia Brown owned. But Frenier's gone. Frenier is there's nothing there, and the other town of Wagaman and Rudock are also completely wiped out. This was a real hurricane. This was an immense hurricane that happened. And it really did happen then. But part of why this is a big deal in this story is, for me, is that Julia Brown has kind of become what we feel like our guardian angel now. So we heard this story, and this was one of the first things when we decided to do Southern Gothic, that this was a story that we're going to look up. And Brienne has spent an immense amount of time tracking down every piece of paperwork that she can find on Julia Brown and trying to tell us who she really is. And this is what we've found out. Basically, in the 90s, there was a Weather Channel show that came out, and it came out. It was called American Supernatural. And that was the first time that Julia Brown really came out in pop culture in this story. And they told the story exactly like I just said. This is the legend. This was a pissed off voodoo priestess. She was mad and she destroyed this town. And this was the story in the 90s when that came out. And then other stories have come out more and more. And we've found that from the time that she died, this entire legend has gone from one thing to another. And that newspaper article that I mentioned that came out 2 days after she died mentions nothing about voodoo. Nothing at all. She was just a beloved member of the community. Then in the 70s, a newspaper came out that was kind of a retrospective. One of the few surviving people, they were a teenager. Her name was Helen Schlosser-Berg. She was a teenager when this hurricane came over. And she was doing an interview in this local newspaper. And they asked her, they said, do you think that Julia Brown cursed the town? Now, as far as we can tell, this is the first time that the oral history of Julia Brown as a voodoo priestess actually was written down, was in the 70s. This is the first time where we actually see somebody publishing, hey, Julia Brown, she's a voodoo. Essentially is what, you know, and it's in the 70s. And Helen Schlosser-Berg, she comes back and she says, you know, even if she would have been trying to warn us. She wasn't trying to curse us. She would have been trying to warn us. So as far as we can tell, it sounds like historically speaking, she actually was beloved and this wasn't a thing. Now we can go into all the stereotypes and all in the 70s and horror movies. All of a sudden voodoo kind of becomes a little bit of a stereotypical thing. And I don't know, did you guys see, what was that movie? Skeleton Key?
Yeah.
I love that movie.
You remember that? We were probably in high school when that came out or something.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, that was fairly recent. Just the most racist, stereotypical piece of shit ever. You know, that stuff plays a lot into these stories as to what it is. So my sister spent a massive amount of time researching this and looking at it. And we've found out Celestin, they got this property. Celestin, he fought for the United States Army in the Civil War. He was a member of the U.S. colored troops. And so he was given this 40 acres of land to go and farm because he was in the Civil War and fought for the United States. And so we kind of feel like in a lot of ways, Julia Brown wasn't actually a voodoo priestess. Some people would argue otherwise. I know that there's some folks in New Orleans that claim otherwise. But I feel like she's very likely what's called a root worker, which would have been essentially just herbal medicine. It would have been somebody who grew up having to take care of themselves, and it was passed down from generation to generation as to this is the herbal remedies from around. So she was likely a root worker. We can't find anything at all that she's related to Marie Laveau. That's always, anytime somebody talks about voodoo, you're related to Marie Laveau. But I believe firmly that if Julia Brown really did have any type of magical anything or spiritual anything, I think that now she's taking care of my sister, to be honest, because this hurricane that came through, my sister got a dent in her gutter, and that was it. And I think that she wants Brienne to tell her damn story.
Wow.
And that's why I think that Julia Brown really, and everything that we've found, every success that Southern Gothic's had, it's always been when we tell the story of Julia Brown. It's always been when we flip a coin and flip it over the bridge in New Orleans over to her. So Julia Brown is definitely, that's our favorite story. And if you're ever down in New Orleans, you should go check out that swamp tour and see where she lived for sure.
I like how you said that the person who did the retrospective interview said that she didn't think that she was doing that as like a curse, though that she was trying to warn them, which still makes sense with that song.
Oh, absolutely. We've kind of traced everywhere that you can find Julia Brown in pop culture at this point. And she's been on a few more TV shows, and every time it kind of takes a different turn, right? And most recently, there was a show that came out called Atlas of Cursed Places. And I can't remember what channel it's on, but they went out to Manchac and they told the story of Julia. And they kind of moved the story over to saying that she was warning them not to continue to cut down the swamp. So when she was there, they were chopping down all the cypress trees. And these cypress trees are really what protect that area from hurricanes. This is what protects us, is in the swampland down there that was destroyed at the beginning of the 20th century. So the latest theory, the latest kind of like evolution of her is that she was warning folks like, stop cutting down our damn land. Stop destroying what's ours. So there's a lot of different ways we could look at it, but she definitely was a real person. And that hurricane definitely did come through when her funeral was going on.
Yeah.
Can you imagine being that person in your life and you never, like, she just lived her life and had no idea that there was going to be this huge story told about her for centuries.
Or maybe she did.
I mean, you're right. You're absolutely
Dun, dun, dun.
right. That's what's so fascinating to me is like, who was she? Who was this person? Who, and we so in February, Brienne found their marriage record. And anybody who's done genealogy or research knows that on marriage records, that's one of the ways you can find out somebody's parents' names. Okay. So the legend always says that her maiden name was Julia Bernard. All right. And we've found no actual reference to that. And Brienne has gone through and we figured, there's a St. Bernard parish out in New Orleans. So Brienne went looking through everything she could find out there for somebody about that age. She went looking for plantations in Louisiana where the owner's name was Bernard to see if she could find Julia on one of the slave schedules. She went everywhere looking with this name Bernard, couldn't find it. So all of a sudden we found this marriage certificate and it is, you have to go to the library because I don't know exactly, ancestry.com and everything was like you had to go to one of their locations to log in. And I waited a week because it snowed that week to go and just get this marriage certificate. And we went and found the marriage certificate and there's no maiden name on it.
Oh my gosh. She's just fucking with you now.
So it pretty much, but it gave us some more information about her. But that's the earliest we can find is when she got married. We don't know anything about her before. I don't have the date in front of me. I want to say it was like 1887 or so she got married. And we found a little bit more about her husband. But that's as far as we've been able to take Julia herself. And yeah, it's interesting. Who was this woman? What did she know? Did she know anything?
Yeah. And it kind of plays into how people, when something is unknown, they make it more scary.
Like you fill in the holes.
Yeah. Well, like you said, she was a root worker. Well, to other people, that could be, she does voodoo because they don't understand that. So, of course, it's going to be like the scariest version to them.
Well, because you fear what you don't know. And so they didn't understand potentially what a root worker was.
Mm-hmm.
And so they feared it because it wasn't something that they were familiar with.
Right.
Oh, yeah. I mean, there's several things you can look at with it because voodoo itself obviously had a lot of negative connotations to Southern aristocracy. I mean, voodoo, that was the religion of the enslaved people. And that was the religion and hoodoo over in Low Country. It got even scarier to these kind of antebellum white people because the Haitian Revolution happened and Nat Turner's Rebellion and all of that kind of had this religious voodoo element. So voodoo became, that's something we need to fear. So there's definitely that element there. There's also, though, this stereotype in all ghost stories, every culture, that person on the edge of town. I mean, we see it everywhere.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
So over by you guys, there's one up in Yazoo City. Have you guys ever been up to Yazoo City at all?
No.
We don't go anywhere.
Okay. You don't go anywhere. Okay.
Nope.
Well, Yazoo City's up by Jackson, and there's the Witch of Yazoo, and it's a story of basically how this witch lived on the edge of town, and city pissed her off. She burnt down the town. Sure enough, this is a theme that comes in ghost stories all the time. So.
Isn't there in the cemetery like a tombstone of her or something?
You do know the story. There you go. Yeah.
Yeah, I know. When you said that, I was like, oh, okay. Yeah, I do know this.
Yeah. The way the story went was basically, and forgive me, I'm not prepared on this one, but my understanding. So this witch of Yazoo, she lived on the edge of town. She was killing people, I believe, something like that. There was quicksand involved, if I understand it right, where they came after her and she went running and something and got caught in quicksand and they caught her and they buried her in Yazoo City Cemetery, which is a beautiful cemetery if you get out there. Beautiful in the sense of it is huge and it's old and it has all these parts to it and it just is so interesting. And she's buried in this cemetery and around it are these iron chains. Okay.
Yeah.
And so after they bury her, basically there's the premonition that the town's going to go down in a similar way as Julia Brown. And then Yazoo City catches on fire and, 90% of the city or something burns down. And they all go to the cemetery after, and the chains that were around it that were supposedly to keep her in the grave were now broken and laying on the ground. So that's the story of the Witch of Yazoo, which, really, it's not that different from Julia, except for, Julia was never actually found. We don't know where Julia ended up.
Gosh, yeah.
So there's your scary shit for Halloween right there.
Love it. I love it. And I love that it is personal to you and your sister and your podcast.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, we grew up hearing about these stories down there. You guys did too. Y'all, we're Southerners, man. When we started Southern Gothic, the whole idea was like, tell me the stories your mama told you. And let me go look up and see what actually happened. And,
True.
And that was kind of like our guiding principle coming into Southern Gothic. And it's incredible, man. Anytime we put out a story, I'll just get a text message from just some random friend that I went to college with or something and be like, oh my God, I grew up right next to that. My wife grew up next to where the Bell Witch lives in the next town over. And even her understanding of what the Bell Witch is totally different than what, when you really research it and everything.
Right.
So, our mama's lied a little, but
yes.
They had to do something to keep y'all in line. I'm looking at you two.
Yeah, shoot, us too. I heard y'all podcast before. I'm not used to being this serious with you two either. Oh my gosh.
I know.
We're usually cutting up somewhere. My favorite thing, we all hung out at the True Crime Convention podcast in Kansas City, and we skipped some of the panels just to hang out and talk about ghosts. we were the bad kids.
I love that too. I did.
Oh man, I had a blast.
That was fun. Again, me and you both actually, Brandon, being more the skeptic. It was so fun to talk about. Like, so what do you think about that one?
Yeah.
Yeah, totally. I know and we should give a shout out to Creep Mom too, because her and I had a long conversation about ghost hunting and all, and she answered a bunch of questions for me. I always and Julia Brown's actually a good example. You'll watch these TV shows after you've really researched something, and they'll be like a ghost hunting TV show, and they'll go somewhere that like you've learned all the history behind, and they'll just totally freaking butcher it. And it makes it difficult to respect the profession that they have.
Yeah.
And I really appreciated Creep Mom, talk to me a bunch about how they actually do it in real life and not just on TV. And that was, I had fun talking to you guys about all that. It was a blast. We were the bad kids there, I think, at the True Crime Convention.
We're always bad.
Whatever. I'm such a fucking rule follower.
That's true. She is.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, I had to take an extra anxiety pill because y'all made me skip the stupid panels. I didn't really.
Did you?
No, I didn't. That was a total
She's
lie.
a liar, okay? She might be a rule follower, but she's a liar.
I embellish. I am Southern, ma'am.
Well,
I embellish and I glisten.
we got to be on that panel together and made Donna sit in the crowd because you two would have just totally overpowered us.
No,
Nobody
because
else would have gotten
Donna
to talk.
True, but Donna likes to play because this girl in this type of setting won't shut her damn mouth.
Mhm.
You put her up there, she's gonna be like a deer in fucking headlights.
Yeah.
Really?
Oh yeah, no way she could have done that.
Well, I tell you, they tell you to like look out in the audience and picture the audience naked, but like Donna's smiling and big in the crowd, that was enough to make me smile. Just sitting out there.
See, and what's so funny is I'm totally the opposite. Like there could have been 1,000 people in that room and I would have been more comfortable than the fact that Donna and Colby and Creep Mom and Creep Niece were in the crowd and like cheering me on. I was like, oh God, this sucks. But if it was like literally 1,000 people I'd never met, I'd have been totally fine.
Oh man. I told you, Carrie. Anytime I was like, oh shit, what do I say next? I just like shot you a look like, save me. Please.
Her take control always.
Oh no, she did great though. That was
fun.
It
That
was
was a fun
good time.
time.
Yeah, you were prepared. I would have. I winged everything.
Well, I did all that at like 2:00 in the morning the night before. I
That
wasn't
sounds
really
like
that
something I'd
prepared.
do. Yeah.
Yeah, I was gonna wing it. I had like a couple questions and I was gonna wing it. And then we saw one of the other panels. I was like, oh shit. And we had it was like, what was it? It was like the party the night before, and we were all we were hanging out and all. And the whole time, all I could think about is, oh shit, I need to go back to the hotel and write something down. And I totally stayed up till like 2:00 pacing around in the hotel room, trying to like make an outline for it.
Well, it paid off because it was great.
It really was.
Oh yeah, that was a blast, man. That was a blast. If anybody come out next time,
yes,
everybody come out and see us.
For sure. Well, thank you so much for doing this with us. We love your stories. We love Southern Gothic. So y'all check out his podcast because it is amazing. He and his sister do such a great job. It's clearly so well researched. They go above and freaking beyond. They're logging into things in the winter storm and all the things. That's what he said.
I know. It was just you.
I don't know. I
had my snowshoes on. Go ghost hunting.
In the snow, uphill both ways.
Yes,
yeah.
Exactly.
New Orleans boy went out in the snow, man. God, that's treacherous right there.
Oh my goodness.
Well, thank you guys for having me. I really appreciate it. And I hope everybody has a wonderful freaking Halloween because this is the season.
This is why we're here.
Yes.
Exactly. Creep it real, right?
Yes, exactly. Well, on that note, like you said, remember,
creep it real
and don't get scared.